please.
Hello, my name is Richard Yongjae O'Neill. I play the viola. I'm a professional violist that plays solo concerts. Let me try that again.
Yeah. Do it as many takes as possible, as you want.
Hi, my name is Richard Yongjae O'Neill. I play the viola. I'm in the Takash String Quartet. I'm very grateful to be here in beautiful Waikiki Beach today.
Yeah, aloha, Richard. Thank you
Aloha.
for joining us today. We are in the beautiful Kamehameha Suite of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. How are you liking Hawaii so far?
It's unbelievably gorgeous.
Yeah. What brought you to Hawaii?
Well, what brought me? Well, you and your wonderful productions have brought me here. I think you have done such a great job of marrying these beautiful stories of immigrant families and the power of music. And I'm just so delighted to be your second musical guest.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. In our film that you just played so beautifully, we follow the story of a Korean woman whose name is Im Ok-sun and her descendants. We would like to know your side of the story as a Korean American. In your family, who started the life in the United States?
Well, I am the son of a Korean war orphan. Her name was Lee Bok-soon, so not too dissimilar. But her American name is Colleen Teresa O'Neill, and my mother was adopted by my American family, the O'Neills, who adopted her during the Korean War, and like many Korean orphans, she was living on the streets, ended up in an orphanage, and was luckily rescued by the Holt Foundation and adopted to Seattle, Washington, where she was raised. So across the ocean a little bit, but a similar story.
Oh yeah, so she started her own history, new history in the United States.
Yes.
By being adopted, your grandmother. And what was like to be raised, by your mom who was adopted to a family here?
Well, it was a little complicated because my mom, somewhere in the process for coming from Korea to the United States, maybe it was protein deficiency, maybe it was malnutrition, maybe it was something else. My mom has arrested development. So she was never able to take care of herself or pursue finding her blood family. And so she was raised by the O'Neills, who were very, very kind people, had 36 foster children of their own, devoted their lives to helping others in need. So my mom, her story and her connection to Korea was something of a curiosity when I was a kid, but I started to really explore it when I entered my 20s and I started professionally working in Korea as a musician. And so I was able to sort of fulfill my family legacy of reconnecting with my mother's country.
Yeah, it was back in 2001, I guess you started, playing in Korea, and now you have a huge following in Korea. What is it like to be reconnected to your mother's roots and heritage?
I first came to Korea in December of 2001 in the specter, in the shadow of 9/11. I was a young student at the Juilliard School of Music, and like everyone that was living in New York at the time, had no idea what the future would be. But in December of that year, the violinist Chung Kyung-hwa invited me to come tour South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan with the Sejong soloists. And so I got my opportunity to come back to Korea. And that first trip really ignited this curiosity of sometimes a lot of American immigrants, Korean diaspora, any immigrant story, you end up wondering where did I come from? What's my history? What do I have relatives in other countries? And I had those questions my whole life, but they were just all there was no answer.
Right.
So it was it started this lifelong exploration, which ended up in several documentaries. Most notably, one for KBS,
The 인간극장, right?
인간극장, Human Theater in 2004, which really helped introduce my mom's story and my story to the Korean public. And ever since, I've had basically, I inherited a family of people that I never thought I would ever have. You know, I have basically, my family is very small. It's my mother and me,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
nobody else. And all of a sudden, we had all these people that sort of embraced us and welcomed us and were just so generous. So now, you know, that's almost 20 years ago, but I still feel that initial love and embrace from the Korean public.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Yeah, whenever I went to your concert in Korea, I could feel that kind of really warm vibe from the audience. I'm sure you felt that from the stage too.
Music is about sharing, and being a performer, a lot of times classical music is often seen as there's a barrier that the music is difficult, or it's from another time, or it's too long, but I think there's something about the way that I connected with Korea, because people knew me as a son of, you know, of a daughter that so many people in Korea understand, and it was really meaningful for me to connect with people on that level first, and then a lot of people followed me on my own personal journey, which is
Right.
as a classical musician.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's right. That's also.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
That also was a helicopter.
yeah. The helicopter.
Nice.
Yeah, that's just sweet. Oh, that's great. Was she able to see? Yeah, yeah. I'm okay. I'm just asking him question. Doesn't have to be recorded. Does she recognize that you go back to Korea, or
Oh, yeah.
she does? Do you think she was happy that when she found out that you were doing this type of like a lot of communication with your fans from Korea?
Oh, she's been back twice. She loves it.
Oh, is that right?
She has people recognize her, and she has like the time of her life. She's like, she likes the
Oh, that's
attention.
so sweet.
Yeah.
Is it rolling?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's
Don't
that's
include
no.
that.
Yeah, okay. Don't include that. Okay.
No.
All right.
My mom will kill me.
really, really. that was very cute of her.
No,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so we can come back with the question.
Okay. What was the last part? You were finishing up your answer by saying
Talking about Korea, coming back to Korea and the public.
Yeah, yeah. And we're talking about the stage, like if you feel the. You
Yes,
know,
yeah.
From it. That's very sweet, you know, to hear. Because whenever I know that the 인간극장 was so popular in Korea, and I was thinking one time that did it bother you in any sense that people recognize you from watching you, you know, in this Korean TV rather than seeing you as a musician?
No, you know, I'm a small town. I was raised in a town of 3,000 people, where in Pacific Northwest, and I come from a very non-conventional background for most classical musicians. Lots of classical musicians. It's a very hard road to become a classical musician. It's very expensive. There's all
Right.
this tradition involved, and it's very competitive, and a lot of people that succeed have a lot of wind behind their sails.
Right.
And I had absolutely none of that, so I don't really mind the whole. I mean, you know, you try to get people to come listen to concerts because it's meaningful to you, but that's maybe the challenge in life, is just because something's meaningful to you doesn't mean that somebody next to you will find it the same way. And I find music such an amazing shared thing, you know, it's such a great thing to share. And so I didn't mind, because it really did bring people that had never, ever heard of Mozart or Beethoven or Bach. They didn't care about that stuff, but they came to the concert because they wanted to sort of see what I was about. And a lot of people have stayed, which I really like.
Yeah, yeah. And then through that experience, they ended up, you know, becoming a classical fan, not just your fan, but, you know, they got introduced into the classical music and all that. And a lot of times people got to know about this instrument called viola, you know, because of what you have done in Korea. So it was a tremendous.
Yeah, the viola has suffered a sort of, it's been called the Cinderella of the orchestra. I think the viola sort of, if she, or the viola is Cinderella, I would say the viola has found her glass slipper and is at the ball with the prince at the moment, because I think the viola as an instrument now, there's so many young violists that play very well, and there's a majority of the new compositions, there's so many new pieces written for viola, and it's really taking it's not just this auxiliary backup band instrument in the orchestra that everybody makes fun of. I mean, there's some really serious violists now in the world, and really serious music written for the viola.
Yeah, so knowing your childhood wasn't, that easy, who did you get the biggest support from?
Well, music teachers aside, which there are many that I love and adore, I would say that my family, especially my grandmother, was probably the most influential person in my life. Well into her 80s, she was taking me to lessons and supporting me, and she was a tough person. She wasn't very. A lot of parenting these days is very flowery, and she was strict.
Really?
But I think she was one of those people that you don't talk about your love, you just do it.
Yeah.
And she didn't complain, and I'm sure it was hard for her, but she was really great, and we spent so many hours together that I think I probably bonded with her the most, and she was I still miss her. Yeah, she was a very important part of my development.
I see. Did you live with her? Like, you grew up with her?
I grew up with her.
So it was your grandparents and your mom and you?
I grew up with her till about I was 15, and then I went to boarding school, and then
Oh, is that right?
after boarding school I went to college, and in my first year of college she died. So it was
Oh, I see.
so it was she didn't get to see any of the future.
I
She
see.
just got to see the beginning, which
Oh,
I
I see. I mean, she saw you getting into Juilliard and
No,
everything.
she only saw me getting into USC, but yeah, she was, I guess that's the thing when you're a good parent, you do your best, and you set people up so they can hopefully.
Right. For sure. Yeah, yeah. And how old were you when you started showing your talent, I guess? And then she recognized you that, Richard is gonna become maybe a violist, and I like to put in as much effort as possible for him.
Well, it was funny. She was like one of those types of people that, like, you never tell somebody directly what they are. So you're never like, oh, you're so talented. No, just never anything. But she would tell everybody else.
Oh.
So now I hear later in life, she would say to, like, my teachers, like, I have a genius little boy that he's so talented. But she would never let me know that.
Oh, I see.
So I think I think she believed in me.
I see.
My teacher said that but I think genius is I would not say a genius at all. I think I really like music, and I like listening to music. I had very few friends in my community. It was primarily, there were no Asians, there were no Latinos, no black people. So it was a little bit hard, and I had a handicapped mother growing up. So it was kind of rough. People were really mean to me, and they were really mean to my mother. And it was sort of isolating, and music was the only thing that I felt completely comfortable and non-judged doing. So
It was like your friend, your refugee, and everything, I guess, to you.
I think a lot of artists, you sublimate things because, you're a small little Asian kid in a tough situation. You don't have a dad. You're sort of like it was good. I mean, I'm glad I had that perspective now, because it teaches you a lot of things about how the miracle of life and all its permutations. But when you're a kid, sometimes it's not the fun thing to sort of be made fun of all the time and
Of course.
bullied.
Yeah.
But
For sure. And what's the fondest memory that you have with your grandmother?
probably just sitting in the car. I think there was this 85-year-old woman and this scrawny little, like, 10-year-old Korean little musician, and I would sit in I would sit shotgun, and she would drive, and we drove she had this big station wagon, and you know how, like, a lot of older people, I'm not meaning to be profiling, but she would sit there and she would drive so fast, this big car, and I would sit there sort of like, I hope we make it. but she powered through every time. So just hours and hours of just sitting in the car together, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like she's got this really deeper love, for you that got her, to drive everywhere, when she's 80 years old and or that. And I'm sure she's very happy, seeing you, what you're doing and all that.
She said I was her favorite.
Oh.
She used to read to me every night. Sometimes she would say something. That was the one time she'd let it slip. That's how I kind of knew she liked me. She's like, "You're my favorite of all the people in the family. You're my favorite." So it's like, okay, I'll take that. But, yeah.
I'm really sure that she's really happy with what you're doing now. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing the beautiful story with her. And you just briefly mentioned that growing up in that small town with your mother and your grandparents were not easy. Was there like an identity issue growing up? It was early 1970s and 80s as a Korean in a small town of the Washington state.
I would say nowadays diversity and your heritage is celebrated. A lot of kids that have immigrant parents, they're bilingual or trilingual. They speak many languages. But my grandparents were of the mind that we want this child who's a surprise and not wanted already, and we have him now. So if we want him to not fail, he better speak English perfectly and assimilate. So it was sort of that mentality, which I regret in some ways, because I really wish I had that ability. I had learned how to speak another language before I was 13 or something, so I could have not had any accent but it was just one of those things that they were like, no, you have to blend in, you have to be American. So I'm not jealous of a lot of the young people I teach now, that they have much more of a world view and they're celebrated, they have multiple identities. But it was also destabilizing because in one hand, my little community, nobody really accepted me like
as who you are.
I mean, it was sort of always, my mom and I were like the outcasts, like small little things like the barber, like they're cutting your hair and Richard, don't smile, your eyes disappear or something. It was like, well, I want to smile, but it was sort of like, the small little things like that. And you're like, okay, or you sure don't look like an O'Neill, you'd meet somebody and it was like, okay, that's not particularly nice. But, but then also I've encountered the same thing when I've gone back to Korea, like because my Korean I didn't speak growing up, it's very awkward for me. And so sometimes when I hear my clunky Korean, people have said really horrible things to me and I kind of just laugh it off. But it's a little like, I felt like my whole life, like a lot of people just belong because by default, they belong somewhere. I've never really felt like I belonged. Maybe only in the musical community I felt like I've truly belonged. But a lot of communities I've lived, I feel sort of like an outsider a little bit.
Is that right? Well, how did you manage to persevere or overcome? It must have been tough, like especially when you're a teenager.
You put your priorities first. It's survival, right? We had no money, we had no capital. I didn't have an instrument, and so the only way to sort of succeed was just to take humongous risks and sort of step up to the edge of the cliff and like go for it. And luckily I think people react well when they see you're dead serious about something. I think that a lot of people, my teachers or patrons later in life, they saw that I loved music so much and it meant everything to me that they were willing to help support me or help just give me that extra push. And I'm very grateful, because if I didn't have all the generosity over the years, I would have never been able to be sitting here right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to hear. It is, right? And music must have helped you, every stage of your life. Can you share some of the stories that how you got to overcome some kind of difficulties through music, either like whether it's performing or practicing, or was there any story that you can share about what music has done to you?
Well, it's a general principle. I think if education's everything, right? I mean, it helps you evolve. And I think partially it's when you surround yourself with greatness, you study something great, like great literature, great books, great art, great music. I think it helps you evolve. And I think being around not only devoting my life to studying music at a very, very intense level, but also being around practitioners, being around people that are also musicians that are also similarly invested in the music means everything to you. It helps you sort of get on this sort of momentum of it makes you a much better person. And I have to say, a lot of my friends they're really amazing. I think all of my friends are much more talented than me, and they sort of, I tag along, and I don't know why they're friends with me, but they stick with me, and I learn so much from them, and it's just, I think it's music is an amazing. I think so many things in life, words are complicated. I always think of the Little Prince, that book, an amazing book, and I think about the parable of the fox and the little prince, and how the fox is talking about words are the source of miscommunication.
Right.
So every day I want you to sit a little bit closer to me, and then they become very, very close. And I think music sometimes is like that, because music doesn't need that translator. It doesn't
Right.
need that. It's like there's no way to misinterpret music, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can experience it for what it is.
It is really, truly is a universal language. It goes beyond the language and words.
I think it goes back to like before we could even, I think growing up in this sort of family, you know, there were a few handicapped kids that I was growing up around when I was a young boy, and I learned from a young age, also because I needed to talk to my mother and my mom, you know, you learn that everyone has their way of communicating, and it's sort of your responsibility to listen. All human beings, living creatures, they all have their own way of communicating, and I think if you sort of listen with this, and you somehow you can understand people.
Yeah.
And I think as a musician, that's very, very important, you know, to listen, really, truly, to listen.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah, I really agree with what you said. Now what's the best part of being a musician?
What's the best part of
you
music?
get to come to Hawaii.
Well, doing what you love every moment of your waking life. I mean, I think everybody dreams to be doing what they love to be doing. You know, life is very short. Every moment counts. So like for me to be able to make music for people all across the world, and it's such a gift.
It is really, and you benefit so many people with your music that you create. That's awesome. And what's to be more specific, as a musician, what's your favorite part of being a performer? Like, you know, being on the stage, or when you see audience, you know, happy listening to you, or some people say, you know, rehearsal is their favorite part.
I think one of my problems is that I either live in the past or I live in the future, and not in the present. And I think one of the great joys for me personally is when I'm a musician, when I'm playing a concert, not rehearsal, because a lot of rehearsal is picking things apart and practicing, thinking about but when you're actually playing the concert in front of the audience, you're in that moment. And that moment is unique. And you can pour everything into that moment. It just, you don't have to worry about things that are coming or things that you've done. It's just that moment.
Right.
And I think that's the true magic, that you can actually be present. You know, it's so much of my life I'm really not that talented when it comes to letting things go, or, you know, but that's the joy of being a musician, is that you get to perform and put everything into that one special moment.
Yeah.
Of
It's
the
never
music.
the same. It's never the same.
No,
Yeah,
it's very unique. I like that a lot of too. I think that's a very nice deadline about music. You have to over prepare, because, as you know, when you're playing as a musician yourself, when you're practicing, how it goes in the practice room under safe conditions is often not how it goes in the real performance. A lot of times you prepare like that, and disaster strikes. You're just not prepared. So you have to over prepare all the time, and shoot hoops from different locations to sort of understand things in the moving nature of how things can really go wrong very quickly, and how not to let things go wrong derail the performance, but how things to go wrong can be a benefit, and you just move on and just go with the flow. But I really love that part of music. It teaches you how to really invest everything into that moment where you're with the audience. And I think that's maybe the most important thing about the lesson for young musicians is you don't spend those thousands of hours practicing so you can show off. You spend those thousands of hours so you can serve people that come to you. You can give them that sublime experience of art. You know, a lot of the music we perform, the composer's been dead for hundreds and hundreds of years, but because their music is so great, you get that ability to study it, understand it, live it, and then recreate it for them in that moment. And almost like time stops and that composer is never dead and their composition lives once more. And I think it's an amazing process, very worth the time and the effort.
It really, truly is amazing process. So when you get a new piece of music, what's your creative process? Like, do you try to interpret, you know, like, let me do this one. After your answer, speaking of that, can you describe your creative process? Like when approaching a new piece of music, how do you interpret the music?
I do my best to do my homework. I think you get a score and you try to be as diligent as possible, and you look at the score, and from all your years of experience, you extrapolate. You figure out what you think the music means. And in the way, music notation itself is an abstraction. It's two-dimensional notation, but it's not two-dimensional listening, right? It's like a infinite world of listening, the imagination. So a lot of times what you have to sort of, the inference is one thing. It's a big help sometimes when you can actually talk to a composer live and they just say, because I've had so many instances where I do my homework and I go to the composer, first rehearsal, and the composer's like, that's not what I wanted at all. What were you thinking? I was like, well, I did my best. But I think that's the nice thing about living composers, which there are many, and I get to work with a lot of them, is they can tell you very directly what they want.
I see.
And then you can come this process between the performer and the composer. With the composers that have died, sometimes you just do your best. A lot of classical music is tradition. Like my teacher studied with this teacher that studied with the composer, and they know, and they said this, and I like that aspect of it, the tradition being passed down like a craftsman. But I also like the fact that things evolve and things change, and so you can sort of, it's an evolving process where music itself, it goes through, it goes with the time, you know, with the present time.
Yeah, for sure. And then depending on your interpretation, depending on, you know, your mood even, you know, it becomes a totally different music, and that's the magic of the music too.
I think the magic sometimes with classical composition is like, I think it's very important for the composer always to win. We're a recreator as the musician. I'm not an original content creator. I am a recreator. So I do my best to serve whoever's piece it was. And so that in itself can be a difficult process sometimes, because sometimes you have your own feelings and your own prejudices, and you try your best sometimes to not let your own baggage and your own stuff interfere with what the composer is telling you to do, you know.
Yeah, thank you. And was there any piece that you have performed in the past that changed your perspective of music?
I think many pieces that have been written, that I've been part of their premiere, their first public performance, have changed me, because I enjoy the process of, you know, living. We don't know what's going to be listened to in 100 years. We can do our best to present it to the public, and then it has to be ultimately the composition that lives. But a lot of these premieres that I've done have really taught me a lot about the importance of championing new works, and also to play new works. And it's fun for the performer to be part of something that people haven't heard before, because sometimes when you're playing a piece by Mozart or Beethoven that's been played 300,000 times over the last 200 years, you feel like this weight on your shoulders, like, oh, I need to, but sometimes when you're playing a piece for the first time, it's like, wow, this is the first time. And from this point onward, hopefully this piece will have its own life.
Right, and then you're introducing a new repertoire to classical fans for sure.
I think
What-
that part of the process is very important with classical music. I hate to even use the word classical music, but it's essential that it evolves with the time and remains relevant for the people listening today.
For sure.
Which I think it's great to play the classics, but I think it's also very important to keep it moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. What about when you play like a Korean music, like your Somjip Agi was a huge hit in Korea. When you play like Arirang, do you have like a different emotions and feelings or?
One of my favorite classical composers is a Hungarian composer named Bela Bartok. He was probably one of our first ethnomusicologists. He lived in the early part of the 1900s, and part of the reason I'm in the Takács Quartet, my Hungarian quartet, is because of Bela Bartok. But Bartok had this phrase that folk music is complete in itself, and I really believe that. Music of the people doesn't need anything else. It's totally complete.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
Is it good? Should we do it again or?
No, it was good.
Okay, because I'm gonna use that piece probably.
Just wait
Yeah,
now.
because the folk music has like it's got a lot of history in it already.
I love,
Okay,
you know,
you can continue now.
Okay, so give me 1 second. Yeah, I agree. Like when you listen to the folk music, it's got its own history already in the music.
Bartok traveled around all these little villages that now might be Hungary, might be Ukraine, might be all sorts of, the lines in Europe have been drawn so much, but Bartok really wanted to capture these little villagers, the music of this history that was embedded, and he took this primitive wax cylinder around and he recorded all of this stuff, and
Oh.
I think he felt it was important, and I really agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
music that it has all this humanity
For sure,
in it,
yeah, yeah.
and I think with Korean traditional music too, it's just very, very important to keep it, keep it in the ear.
For sure, yeah, yeah. Can you talk about like particularly memorable performance that you had in the past?
Particularly memorable performance. I think there have been a lot of professional things that I love. But I think when I was about 12 years old, living in Squam, Washington, it was Valentine's Day, and I was asked to go into the convalescent home and play for these elderly people that were in this living facility. Often times a lot of these people they'd had no visitors, and it was Valentine's Day, and their spouses had died, they're alone. And I remember going, I probably sounded terrible. I can't imagine what I sounded like when I was 12 years, but I went around to these rooms and I played, and it was really meaningful, and I could see some of the people, they were happy, some people started crying. It was just this gamut of emotions and experiences, and I realized that from that moment, I realized, just a little bit of brightness in somebody's day can make all the difference.
For sure, yeah.
And I haven't lost that feeling of performance. I mean, I love going around the world and playing on these very famous stages for these cultured audiences all over the world. It's great, but I think that sense of connection with the people that you're playing, sometimes you really want to know that what you're doing is being heard, and heard in that sense that people that they seek music, you want to know
Right.
that they're getting it, and that's
For
very
sure.
important to me.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see that, your message was delivered, to them in different ways, and that's really touching. Must be.
I think maybe through the pandemic, we really realized that being together is very important. And the process of coming to a concert where people gather, when we
Right.
couldn't do it, we were really, musicians, myself included, were very depressed because we couldn't partake in that.
Right, yeah,
So I
yeah.
think now post-pandemic, that's been more of my issue. Just even if I'm jet lagged beyond belief and I've been traveling for months and I haven't been home and I'm sick or whatever, every concert matters. Every moment of that concert matters because those people have taken the time to come hear you play. So you better do your best because they've given you their time,
Yeah.
their most precious commodity, to come hear you play.
That's awesome. Like when you played in Korea, in your, home country, mother country, do you feel something different, or is it, you don't see?
I feel a little bit like it's like the hometown advantage for the team. You know, it's like I feel a little unfair sometimes because I just feel like I walk on stage and already people are nice.
People
You know,
already
because
love you already before
Yeah.
even you start a first note.
I have to say feels really good because there are parts of the world I walk out and there's mentalities sometimes when you walk out like you have to prove yourself when you walk out. You have to show me that you're worth my time.
Right,
But-
people are judging you.
A little bit judgy, but, which I don't mind too because that's a good challenge. But I think in Korea I've never felt that. I feel like people they want to hear what I have to say, and they're there to see what I've prepared for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And anti-Asian hate crime is still a big issue. Do you think there's something that music can do to mend that problem?
That's been one of the more painful products of the pandemic is I've seen a lot of really horrible, heinous acts like people pushing grandmothers down and I mean, who does that? I mean, it's just anyways, I mean, it's I don't know, social issues and music, it's like I think on one hand social issues need to be addressed for what they are and it's hard to say music can really affect that. I mean, I think hopefully the process of music makes people a better human being, but I think those racial issues need to be addressed for what they are and dealt with, you know, and that's been a painful part of the last few years.
For sure, yeah. Just to seeing the news, it's really heartbreaking, especially.
I think
for the older
scapegoatism
people.
happens everywhere. People just need a scapegoat, and I think during the coronavirus, the rhetoric that was flying around politically was, at least in the United States, was so horrible and vile that how can it not be? It's a byproduct of what people were saying.
Right, right. That's just all right. Yeah, Richard, you've accomplished so much in your musical career already. Is there something else that you still want to do? Yeah, in terms of like as a musician or as just a human.
I think I'm pretty happy. I think I'm living my dream, and I get to play in a world famous string quartet. You know, a tour of the world. It's my dream job, and I have everything that I could possibly wish for. I just maybe keep my health, and so I can keep on doing it.
What is your biggest fear in life?
Oh gosh, I think losing things is part of life, and I've lost a lot of things like everybody, but I think health things are hard. I think maybe it's the hardest challenge is when somebody gets sick, and my mom got cancer a few years ago, and that was one of the worst challenges because there's nothing I could really do to help her. And sorry.
Yeah, that's
so-
wait.
But that being said, I mean, I think sometimes you just have to trust what. I guess that's the life lesson for me is that it taught me. It's like you can only do a certain amount of things, right? I mean, you can't control things. You can try to help mitigate pain for someone else, but you just try to be strategic. But
Sure.
it's just coming to terms with things, sometimes difficult situations that there's no explanation. So I guess that's my fear is sometimes that I think you do your best to prepare for things, but some things you just have to let it go. And
Knowing when to let go, I guess, is
Yeah,
really important too.
that's a challenge.
Yeah. What advice would you give to aspiring musicians who are just starting their musical career?
I think embracing failure is important. You know, I look at a lot of my friends, and when I was a young musician, I looked at all these people that succeeded, and I was like, wow, they're doing so much better than me. And I would say that the failures actually in some ways helped me prepare more for later in life, and the staying power of a career. You know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, like a lot of things are, you build on past experiences so you can improve. And so this whole idea that if you have a few failures that you're done, I would look back and say no. I think sometimes it's more important your intention. If you really love it that much and you're willing to keep on working.
Right. Yeah. That's really meaningful what you said for sure.
There's a little birdie here.
Oh yeah. The animals like you.
No, we're around food. That's what the animals.
Oh,
little
they're-
chirpy chirpy.
Yeah, that's cute. That's awesome. Let me see. Also, the question I wanted to ask you. I asked this same question to all the interviewees that I met. From your Korean ancestor, in this case, your mother, what have you learned from her? Like, so you can say, please start answering by saying, I have learned this from my mother.
Well, I think what I've learned from my mother is that she has been through a lot, much worse things than I'll probably ever see. She lived through the war and losing her parents when she was a toddler, and discrimination I can't even imagine. But she's still really positive, and she lets everything go. She just really doesn't get upset by things. And I think because I'm overly sensitive, I get upset by so many things. But I really admire that about my mom. She just lets it go, and she lives her life, and she's very sunny, and I admire that. And I think the other lesson I would say, if it's about ancestors, because I really don't know any of my ancestors. I can't.
You couldn't
I
find.
can't say my biological grandfather or grandmother on my mother's side. I can't say who my father is on my side. I can't say that. So I have to sort of I live in this sort of land of make-believe a little bit. But I think the one thing is, like, you do your best to honor all the people that came before you. We're here because they made it possible for us to be here.
They paved the road.
They paved the road. Who knows what sacrifice they went through. And so we live, and we have, our life is our own, but our life is also all the people that came before us. And I like to think of that tradition, especially for my dad, who's dead now and never got to meet, and all my relatives that I didn't ever get to meet too, that I hopefully if they can see me or something, that they could be proud that someone is carrying on this tradition of keeping things going for the Lee family, for the Yeager family, for all those people that I didn't really get to meet, that I'm honoring their what they gave me.
Oh, that's awesome. And your participation in our film is a way of honoring, those who came before us as a musician. So thank you for that. And I would like to ask you, what was the reason or the motivation that you decided to participate in this film? I know you were super busy and you had to come, out of your busy schedule. What was the motivation?
Part of my life the last 2 decades has been teaching at the university level. So luckily I love that responsibility. I love being around openness and freshness. But one thing I realize is for younger people, a lot of times, and I'm not talking judgmental, but if they don't experience something, it doesn't have meaning. So, like, let's say it's something cataclysmic, like I mentioned, like 9/11. That's very, very powerful to me, and I remember it. But then you ask younger people, like my undergrads now at CU Boulder, and they don't think of 9/11 as like cataclysmic. So when we deal with people's story about the Korean War, we're getting to a point where a lot of people, soon we won't have anybody that's alive, and we won't have any connection. And it's like the most important thing is to never forget those people and what they gave us, and what that time in the world was, so we can try to avoid problems like that again. Because unfortunately, I think human nature is we tend to repeat these horrible, terrible, destructive cycles, and the Korean War was such a terrible, it was so horrible for people, and it's still not resolved, and it's, so why do we need to have things like that in the past? And then all the suffering and all the sacrifice from all the people, let's honor. And I appreciate that. I mean, we're in paradise, and you think but if the land could talk and could remind us of everything that's happened here, I'm sure it would tell us a lot of things. So it's our job to tell the stories and keep them alive.
For sure,
Way past when the people that told the stories were gone.
Yeah, I agree. The Lee Mok-sun, Mrs. Lee Mok-sun, who is the main character of our story, came here when she was 15 years old. It was during Japanese occupation in Korea, and she started her whole life in here and made a history, basically. And honoring her with the music, that the gift that you have was really a a meaningful project for us, and we hope that a lot of audiences will enjoy that too.
Yes, it was really nice to see Gary. You know, it's great to see, you know, I might not have kids of my own, but I can see it around and other people have kids, and the lineage just keeps on going, and people keep on doing what they should be doing.
Yeah.
You know, and somebody's sacrifice way down the line allows people to have such a good life. And I really like that about, you know, that Gary goes and he still remembers and he keeps it alive. I think that's really, as long as we keep people's memory alive, I think that's really important.
For sure, yeah. Again, thank you for being such an important part of our film by playing the beautiful music. Yeah,
It's my honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And one last question. If you could, you know, is there something that you want to say to your grandmother? Like speaking of, you know, her being such a big part of your life and giving you a lot of love, just like how Mrs. Lim Mok-sun gave so much love to Gary and, you know, all other descendants of hers.
I really think my language skills are very limited. So I would say, the only thing I would say, if I could have a magic time capsule and take people back from the past, like listen to my dad or my grandmother or my grandfather, all the people, I would just teleport them to the present and sit them in a concert hall and just be with them for the concert. You know, sometimes I think about that when I'm playing. It's like, if I could break time and they were here, wouldn't that be so amazing? You know, I didn't have to say anything. They just sit there and they could see and they could hear it. It would be so nice. It'd be really nice.
Right,
So-
through music.
You just keep that imagination alive, I think.
Yeah, that's very heartwarming for sure. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. And shall we do this is end of it, but shall we do the opening, just the first few seconds? I in the beginning it was like 100% smooth, so we have enough time there.
I will find out. But
Okay, yeah.
opening, what do you mean?
Just the very in the beginning. Let me ask, do you mind doing your introduction one
Yeah,
last
sure.
time? Yeah, because usually in the beginning, like
What
you
do
know,
people want them to know about me?
what you said was just, you know, it's great, but I usually do it at the end one more time because toward the end of the interview, we are much more.
Should I talk about that I'm Korean American or?
Sure, that'd be nice. Yeah. Like I am Richard Yongjae Onyeon, and I'm Korean American, you know, raised in. And what's the most important thing in your life? What do you think? Is it too hard? or you can say like you're happy to be in Hawaii or whatever. Yeah, you can keep it short. Right. So looking at the camera.
Hello, my name is Richard Yongjae O'Neill. I'm a Korean American musician. I play the viola, and I'm so happy to be here in Waikiki with Jin Young for this filming.
Perfect. Thank you. And aloha, Richard. Thank you for being here with us. We're so grateful that you make the time to come out, you know, out of your busy schedule. We are in the Kamehameha Suite of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Cut. So we might use the second one. Thank you. And I gotta ask you if you could perform.
Yes, yes.
So let me ask you that. Okay. So before we wrap up, what was the question we were thinking of? Before we wrap up, would you mind playing a beautiful music for us?
Before we wrap up, would you mind?
Do you mind playing?
Is there a piece that you would like to play for us?
Would that be okay? Okay. Rolling, right? Yeah, thanks so much, Richard, again, you know, for being here with us today, and also for playing so beautifully for the songs of love. And we really wish you all the best. And before we wrap up, is there any music that you could possibly play for us? Let's do it again.
What should I say? Should I say sure?
Yeah.
And then,
let me do it again.
but what am I playing? I mean,
Can you adjust the microphone on Jin Young?
oh, did it fall?
Showing a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
am I playing Brother?
Sure, why not, right?
Is it-
Would you be happy to play that piece? Yeah, brother.
You can say, is there a special piece you'd like to
Play for us
Yeah.
today. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks good.
Will this be this is devoid from the film, right? This is not part of the film, right?
Not period
This is
episode.
part of, this is the own little segment.
Yeah, exactly.
So I
yeah.
could say it's like a teaser for the next episode, or no?
Yeah, tease of the Songs of Love.
Songs of Love
So there's a
episode
small
2.
chance that we might play this 20-minute interview as part of the screening, but it's a totally separate, you
Right.
know. Yeah, yeah. And then you can talk about the, you know, why you like this music, if you like. Right. Thanks so much, Richard. And lastly, I was wondering if there's any music that you could possibly play for us.
Well, I think we could offer a little teaser of one of the
Yeah,
3
that'd be
musical selections that we've prepared for Songs of Love episode 2. We've been traveling around paradise, playing all these beautiful songs. So I think maybe the most environmentally inspired might be Brother. So let's give that a whirl.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Richard.